What do you think of private people who venture on the capital market without any professional help?
I suppose somebody who's sitting at home and takes the financial papers and gets a pin out and goes through like this, he might have some incredible talent, which I don't know about, where he has some other sense where he can make decisions and gamble successfully. But that's rather like horse betting or whatever. Certainly there's been a lot of cases whereby a lot of the so-called sophisticated money managers have not performed as well as they should have done, despite and given all the various yardsticks and given all the various informations and so on. And people sitting at home say, I'm sure I can do better than that. I suppose with some people it would be like a glorified casino where you're placing bets and so on.
5.
In 1987, there was a stock market crash. How could it happen?
There's obviously a lot of inquests about the crash of 87. They say particularly the London stock market fell a lot more than other markets, and why was this? What we didn't really take into account was the circuit breaker, which the other markets implemented. What I mean by a circuit breaker is the cut-off point. When a market drops in New York, in Japan or whatever, it's supposed only to drop so much before the market could then be closed in that particular price. In London, we never had a circuit breaker. Markets would go on and on, falling or whatever necessary. So consequently, when fund managers were panicking to move what they could, they would turn to the most liquid market. The only market that was still very liquid was the London Stock Exchange.
6.
What is the role of banks in the stock market?
They advise their customers whether to buy or sell. They are an agency in organising their clients' wishes, i.e. if a client wants to buy shares, they would then suggest certain shares. If the client wants to buy bonds, they would suggest certain bonds. For example, if I wanted to buy shares and I have my account with Barclays Bank, I could just phone up my account with Barclays Bank and say, now look, put me in touch with your stockbroker, and he would then transfer me to the broker within Barclays Bank. Whereas before he would recommend, say, an independent stockbroker, he now would recommend his own bank as the broker. They would then give me the advice, and they would also execute the shares for me within the same bank.
7.
Is the stock market not too much controlled by just a few big corporations?
You may have a situation where the stock market is controlled by fewer and fewer houses at the end of the day. However, from that, I do firmly believe that some of the smaller operations again will begin to start. It's another form of going back completely evolution-wise to how it used to be, because there will be a lot of the smaller accounts that will be disillusioned, leaving their money with such big organisations where they're having to pay excessive commissions or for services or whatever, that they will start to look for smaller companies starting up again where overheads won't be so big and they will be able to provide a service. So I'm not too pessimistic.
8.
What is the reputation of the London capital market internationally?
I used to think British banks are pretty bad because they have far too many people sitting on boards, getting nowhere and so on. But at the same time, when I look around and I look at the German banks and I look at European banks generally, and believe you me, they're very bureaucratic because of their slowness in change. They're like the dinosaur of the dinosaurs. We are bad, but we're not as bad as some of these other areas. And that might sound very chauvinistic of me to say that, but you know, London is a capital of many Europeans. I have some very good Dutch, German, French friends or whatever, and I tell you now, most of these people prefer to work in London, despite all the wrinkles, if you like, of the problems we've had.
9.
What do you think of measures like subsidies or tax facilities in order to stimulate markets?
I don't think any kind of control is a good thing for any market, or any kind of subsidy is a good thing for any market. There should be a very free and liberal type approach by everybody to get the right harmony to the markets. And it can only be good at the end of the day. I'm convinced that well, one of the things I feel is so good about all this internationalism is it stops world wars, if you like. Because, you know, the Japanese now, we're beginning to understand. It's going to take time, and they're beginning to understand us. And if we hadn't promoted all these markets, if you like, for them to come and do their business in, maybe we'd all be still very insular. And that wouldn't be a good thing at the end of the day.
10.
Could you tell us something about what is called insider trading? It is forbidden these days, isn't it?
Now, there's a big obsession at the moment about insider trading. Ever since I was a boy in the city, there's always been a flurry of activity around takeover stocks. And sometimes you could be standing in a pub and having a drink with somebody, and somebody would come over on your shoulder and say, look, you ought to buy so-and-so company. We think they're going to be taken over. Now, these days, you have to be very, very careful about that sort of thing, as to where you got the information, because there could be an investigation, blah, blah, blah. And what they look for is the activity just prior to the share takeover or whatever. And if they see a certain move going on, a certain activity, then obviously they do an investigation.
11.
What do you think of the popularity of the present government in Britain? Do you think it will last?
I still believe deep down that there is a socialist in every conservative, i.e. that if this particular phenomenon finishes, or if we see too many redundancies on the scale that we haven't seen before, if people start to see their house price fall, if people start to see that this is no longer a successful venture, I think you will suddenly see people putting on their old socialist hat again very quickly indeed, and going back to perhaps other values.
12.
The present Conservative government in Britain seems to be very strong. Why is that?
I perhaps blame the other parties, the Labour Party, the Liberal Party, or whatever, for not being able to be a truly meaningful opposition to this government. We've gone through a period now where the government, and everybody knows the government's been making one or two mistakes very recently. There's been several opportunities I should say, where the Labour Party could have actually made much more of this, but we haven't really made it difficult for this government not to continue on this one. She's in a very, very strong position, and obviously the city is well behind her for obvious reasons.
13.
Your clients contact you if they are looking for new staff. Do you ever get complaints about the people you have found for them?
It's very infrequent. It does happen, obviously, that one has a slight problem. But of course, you are a matchmaker. You can only hope that the chemistry is going to be right between the two individuals or the team or whatever. But everybody has to take a certain amount of responsibility here. I can present somebody, I can check details out as far as I can and get references. But at the end of the day, it's still with the client as to whether they want to employ that person.
14.
Are you successful as a recruitment counsellor?
Well, it's difficult to say. I can only judge from the fact that I'm still in business. People will not come on the phone to you and say, hey, Fred Smith that you put to me 2 or 3 months ago, he's really a terrible guy. They might lose him somewhere quietly, and they might start to do business with other people, but you will only find that out in some time period that would lapse, that maybe that was the problem. People here are not so outspoken about the problems that sometimes exist.
15.
Dit is het einde van de toets.